Welcome. There we go. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to my presentation, Learn How to Lead Like a Pro. My name is Dr. Matthew Raidbard. I'm the author of Lead Like a Pro, Effective Leadership Styles for Athletic Coaches. A little bit about me here before we get started. So I've spent my entire professional career as a men's college basketball coach and an athletics administrator. My background is in educational leadership. That's what I got my master's and doctorate in, and my doctorate focused on research to determine the best leadership styles and behaviors for coaches to practice to help them be the most successful leaders. And it was actually that research that I did and the results that were the inspiration for my book, Lead Like a Pro. So the central thesis of the book and everything that I talk about with my work is coaches are leaders. And, one of the things that I get a lot from coaches at all levels of sports when I talk about this is this idea that, if you're not a college coach, a professional coach, if it's not your full-time job to be a coach, that you're a leader, but it's different. And, I always want to set right at the top that no matter whether you're a college coach like I was, a high school coach who's also a teacher, a parent who's volunteering to coach your child's youth sports team, whether you work in parks and recreation, doing different youth leagues, whatever it is, you are a leader. And that leads into the second thing that, I want to talk about right here at the top and kind of just set table set for everyone is that the idea that, all of the decisions that you make for your kids, for your teams are leadership decisions. And, that goes hand in hand with the idea that coaches are leaders. All the decisions that they make are leadership decisions. This is an idea that I do get a lot of pushback on, particularly from college coaches who talk to me about how, Matt, I understand that my decisions are leadership decisions, but, those are the big decisions, right? Like who I play at the end of the game with the game on the line, what play I run, who I start, what I emphasize at practice, things like that. And while those are big, important leadership decisions that oftentimes have an outsized impact, especially in the moment, on outcomes like winning or losing, those are only a small portion of leadership decisions that coaches are making every day, week, month, year for their athletes and their teams. What your communication style is. Do you provide feedback in a group to individual athletes in front of their peers? Do you do it one-on-one? There's no right or wrong way to provide that information, but there are ways that best meet the needs of your athletes and will help you be more successful, right? If you have a new team, you have athletes who are still developing their confidence, giving them feedback in front of their peers might cause them to have one reaction, like shutting down or not responding positively to the feedback you're giving or acting out. Whereas those same athletes, if you talk to them one-on-one and give them that same feedback, might go out and try as hard as they can because, again, they've received it in a way that better meets their needs. So how you communicate is a huge leadership decision. That's not necessarily going to have an impact on winning or losing, maybe in the moment, but over the course of a game, a month, a season, it could have an impact on winning or losing. It more than likely will, but it's also going to have an impact on other, I would say, more important outcomes, such as how good of an experience do your athletes have? Do they enjoy being a part of the team? Do they want to continue with the team once the year is over? Those are outcomes that I think coaches need to focus more on. Winning or losing, coaches are judged by that at all levels of sports. But what's the experience? How are your athletes responding to you? Are they improving? Are they feeling good about themselves? Are you boosting their self-esteem? Are you developing their leadership abilities? Those are all outcomes that are influenced by your leadership decisions. And that's why coaches need leadership training and education. Coaches today at all levels of sports are asked to wear more hats, serve more roles than ever before. When I first got into college coaching, right out of college, it was my dream. I always wanted to be a men's basketball coach. I thought, when I first started working, that the majority of my job was going to be coaching on the court, games and practice. It was going to be designing winning game plans, breaking down film, recruiting, doing all these very basketball-centric, basketball-specific roles and responsibilities. And I was working at my first job at a small Division II school called Western New Mexico, down in the southwest corner of New Mexico. And I was down there for about a month, and I was talking to my dad, and he asked me how things were going. And I told them, I love the team, I love the community, I love the campus, I love everything. I just didn't understand when I was going to get a chance through my job to focus a majority of my time on all those basketball specific roles and responsibilities that I thought were so central to being a college basketball coach. I was actually spending a majority of my time wearing other hats, taking on other roles and responsibilities. I was a class checker, a study hall monitor, a strength and conditioning coach, a nutritionist, a dietitian, a friend, a mentor, a chauffeur. I was wearing all these other hats, taking on all these other roles and responsibilities that were all very important, that all had an impact on outcomes, like what was my student athlete's experience? Were they learning important life lessons off the court? Things like that. But ultimately, I wasn't equipped to take on all those leadership roles and responsibilities. I was very comfortable giving corrections and feedback to my athletes on the court when it related to basketball. I was very comfortable wearing that hat. But I remember the first time that I had to have a difficult conversation with an athlete who wasn't going to class and turning in assignments. I froze. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know, well, do I take a hard stance? Do I take a soft stance? Do they talk first? Do I talk first? I didn't have the tools in my toolbox to be able to properly assess the situation, understand what my athlete needs, and then try to provide that through my leadership to the best of my abilities. That's a difficult position for coaches to be at. But so many coaches are in that position every day because year after year, coaches are being asked to do more in their role of coach. And that ties into the influence that coaches have over their athletes. When you're wearing all those different hats, you have so many opportunities to positively or negatively impact your athletes within your sport under the umbrella of coach. Having that conversation with my athlete, if I don't approach it the right way, now maybe they are even less motivated to go to class. Now maybe it hurts our relationship. Whereas if I approach it the correct way and meet their needs using my leadership style, maybe my communication, empathy, understanding, directness, whatever those leadership behaviors are, maybe I have a positive impact on that student athlete. And now they understand a little better why it's so important that they're present, why it's so important that they comply with deadlines, be organized, stay on task, things like that. So again, in wearing those different roles and responsibilities, I have so many opportunities to have a positive or a negative impact on my athletes. So, one thing that I talk a lot about in my book that, came from my research is the idea that there are leadership gaps for a lot of coaches. If you're a new coach, a young coach, a coach who's hit a plateau in terms of their development or team success, you're coaching for the first time, you're a leader in your profession, you're a leader of adults in your organization, but now you're having to coach 18 to 22-year-olds like me, or high school kids, or really little kids like I coach now with my daughters. There's often a leadership gap. And that's where the leader that a coach wants to be, a leader that the coach envisions themselves as, is not actually the leader that they are. And that generally happens for two reasons. One, that coaches are lacking foundational leadership knowledge. So an understanding of, what does it mean to be a transformational leader? What does it mean to be a servant leader? What does it mean to be a democratic leader? So many times I ask coaches what type of leader they are, and they tell me that they like to delegate a lot of decision-making to their athletes, but they also, when they need to, want to make all their decisions unilaterally. Well, those are conflicting points. One is a democratic leader, one's an autocratic leader, and you can be both situationally, but it's important for a coach to have that foundational leadership knowledge to understand what the difference is, what the key behaviors look like, so that a coach understands when they're being more democratic, when they're being more autocratic, and how to draw that line so that their athletes aren't confused. Fortunately, there's been a huge emphasis on coaches' leadership knowledge in recent years. So a lot of coaches are gaining more of that foundational leadership knowledge to better understand their leadership style and the leader that they are. So a little more commonly these days, the leadership gap is due to coaches not having enough tools in their toolbox to be able to practice the leadership style or styles that are reflective of who they are as a leader. It's great to know that I'm a transformational leader who believes in, clear, positive, and direct communication and helping my athletes be better than they thought they could on their own. How do I do that? What are the tools that I use? Well, I could use my communication. That makes sense. I could be inspirational. I could be motivational. I could really help my athletes believe that they can achieve more. And I can meet a bunch of my athletes that way probably, but not all of them. So now I need another tool. And now I've reached a couple more, but there's still a few who I haven't reached. So I now need another tool. And this is oftentimes the issue for a lot of, first-time coaches, young coaches, coaches that have reached a plateau, even for more experienced coaches who are adjusting to coaching a new generation of athlete. It's having those tools in your toolbox to be able to look at your individual athletes, determine their needs, and be able to take out that tool and say, okay, communication is not working. I'm going to use behavior modeling. Behavior modeling is not working. I'm going to use building up your confidence. Building up your confidence is not working. I'm going to use helping you have a better understanding of your role. Those are all tools that a transformational leader can use to help motivate and inspire their athletes through clear, positive, and direct communication. But it takes a long time to develop those tools, to learn about them, and then be able to use them. And it's impacting a lot of coaches' ability to be the successful leaders and practice the leadership style that's representative of who they are. So how do you determine the right leadership style for you? 3 steps, right? Number 1, reflect on and determine what are your personal values and beliefs as a leader. I believe it's my job to be inspirational and motivational. Even before I knew that was a key behavior of transformation leadership, that just came naturally to me. I felt like it was my role. It's what I wanted to do. So when I started learning about transformational leadership, I immediately had an aha moment. This aligns. I am in some capacity a transformational leader. I really try whenever possible to develop the leadership abilities of my athletes so that I'm not always the one who has to be the leader. That's a very servant leadership behavior. Again, that was something that was always important to me. So when I started learning about different leadership styles, again, I knew, okay, I'm a transformational leader in this regard. I'm a servant leader in this regard. Now I'm building my unique leadership style made up of the behaviors and the beliefs that are important to me as a leader. 2, you have to learn foundational leadership knowledge. So you've got to be able to identify what your beliefs and your personal values are and understand the leadership styles that they align with. That's how I'm able to tell people I am a transformational and servant leader who also believes in democratic leadership. And then as the step 2, explain what that means, putting all of those things together. And then 3, acquire the necessary tools to be able to practice your leadership style that aligns with your personal values and beliefs. Now, how do I take those things and go out and model really great behaviors to, be uplifting and inspirational through my communication? How do I use those tools to represent me and my leadership style, which is a reflection of my personal values and beliefs? So a couple things to kind of remember here before we dive into some of those different leadership styles, and I kind of talk you through them and some really great tools to practice them. Every leader and leadership style is unique. That's because every person has a different belief system, set of personal values, personality, communication style, life experiences. So even if I'm a transformational leader and you're a transformational leader, it's still going to look and feel different because we're different. How we communicate is different. How we motivate and inspire are different, even though we both might be practicing transformational leadership. No leader only practices one leadership style. When I was a coach, my foundational leadership style, the leadership style that I most kind of attributed my leadership practice to, the one that I used the most behaviors of was transformation leadership. But I also pulled in influences from servant leadership, democratic leadership to form my unique leadership style. And that's why everybody's leadership style is a little bit different. You may not have a foundational leadership style. You may see yourself equally in 4 different leadership styles. That's great. Again, all about building your personal leadership style that fits with your values and beliefs. And then your leadership style is going to be continuously growing and changing as you develop as a coach and as the needs of your athletes change. When I was in coaching, my foundational leadership style was transformational leadership. When I transitioned into athletics administration and got out of coaching, my foundational leadership style changed. It became more servant leadership focused. I was no longer working to inspire and motivate my athletes as much. I was more serving them with, what do you need? How can I help you? How could I give you a better experience? How can I give you more support and resources? Same things for my coaches. Same thing for everybody I work with on campus. Again, your leadership style is going to change and evolve as the needs of those people that you're working with are changing and evolving. So what this comes down to is helping coaches make intentional leadership choices. Okay. So that starts with asking yourself these and other important questions. What's important to me as leader? What are my responsibilities as leader? What are my goals for the team? for me, what are my goals for the team? Every year, I wanted my athletes to have a great experience. I wanted them all to enjoy being a part of the team, feel supported, feel like we had a relationship based on mutual trust and respect and open lines of communication. Okay, so I know that's my goal. How do I get there? I get there through intentional leadership choices that are reflective of who I am as a leader. So for me, one thing that I always used to do as a transformational leader was I always wanted to build really strong relationships with my athletes based on mutual trust and respect. Because if we had that trust and respect, I know I was having a positive impact on your experience, because even when things weren't going well, you could trust me and come to me. And that was really important. How do I do that? So for me, I did that. I used a couple of different tools. One was I was very visible and I was very available. I was in my office a lot. I was at the court a lot. I was on campus a lot. I wanted my athletes to see me, particularly outside of the basketball court, as much as possible. So they knew I'm here. I'm invested. If you need me, I might just be right down the hall. I'm one text away and we could have a meeting. I wanted them to know that I was there for them. The other thing that I always did was when I saw my athletes within a basketball context on the court, in my office, or on the department, the first thing I did was ask them something that had nothing to do with basketball. Did you see this movie? How's class going? How are your parents? How is your brother? Whatever it was, it had nothing to do with basketball. Because I wanted to establish that first and foremost, we were two people having a conversation. And then from there, I always try to offer up things about myself so they got to know me as a person, not as a coach. These are pictures of my kids. This is the type of dog I have. This is what my educational background is in. This is the car that I drive, whatever it is. Let's just be two people who are getting to know each other, as opposed to player, coach. Coach tells player what to do. Player listens to coach, right? That's an element of it, and it's an important element of it. But without that mutual trust and respect, without them seeing you as a person, it's really hard to get to that level of trust. It's really hard to get to that level of engagement, because again, they don't really know who you are outside of the context of your sport. So in the next part of the presentation, I'm going to talk through some different leadership styles that are really great for coaches to practice. And I'll talk through some tools that you could use as well to be able to practice them. So first one, transformational leadership, focusing a lot on inspiration and motivation. How do you inspire and motivate your athletes? Well, communication, being positive and uplifting and enthusiastic is a great way to motivate and inspire. That's a great tool. Behavior modeling is another great tool. You know, not everybody responds that well to that inspirational and motivational communication. Sometimes, and I know for me personally, I'm more inspired when I see other people working hard, see other people being resilient, see other people overcoming challenges and adversity. That tells me, that motivates me, tells me that I can do it too. They're doing it. They're showing the way. They're setting an example. You know, that was the form of transformational leadership I always went to first before my communication, because it was more natural for me. You know, you could also instill a sense of purpose in your athletes. You know, don't take for granted that all of your kids understand how important they are and what their role is on the team and how that is valued within the context of team success. So really instilling a sense of purpose, and then, you know, inspiring their confidence. You know, again, even the most seemingly confident athletes that I coached weren't necessarily the most confident when we kind of broke it down, right? They had their insecurities. Maybe it was a facade. And then you had your athletes who were new to the team, still developing, building up their confidence. You know, there were so many times in my career when I would show an athlete a drill and we'd talk about, you know, you have to get better at this, and this is how we can do it, and I can help you. And they would have a reticence to just going out and trying to do it. And I learned over time through experience that a lot of that was because they didn't have the confidence to go out there and make those mistakes that are required for improvement. So really building up their confidence, telling them, we can do this. I'll help you do it. We can do this together, can really help them take that leap and that next step to be able to go out there and do those things that you're asking them that are hard, but are ultimately going to help them improve. You know, transformation leaders use a lot of clear, positive, and direct communication. You know, build up your athletes, work to enhance their strengths and mask their weaknesses until you could help develop them into strengths, or at least not be weaknesses anymore. And then again, show really strong support for your athletes. Take an optimistic approach to their improvement and display a lot of enthusiasm. I always say sometimes coaches who are transformational leaders, sometimes you've done all the coaching you need to do, and sometimes it's time to take a step back and just be a cheerleader and be there for your athletes and exalt their success. Servant leadership, another really great leadership style for coaches to practice. And at the foundation of this is put the needs of your athletes and team above everything else. That's what it ultimately comes down to. How do you do this? You model really great behaviors like unselfishness, empathy, teamwork, inclusion, listening, and a lot of other really great behaviors. That's how you set a template and a standard for your athletes about how you expect them to treat one another and others. Because you're displaying those behaviors, you're modeling them every day, and that gives you the credibility to be able to say, you're not doing this to my standard or expectation, and I have shown you how it should look and will continue to. And that's where you set those high standards expectations, and you have a really great level of accountability as well. The other aspect of servant leadership that I learned later in my career, and I wish I had emphasized more when I was first getting into coaching, was work to develop and enhance leadership abilities of all members of the team. Early in my career and really throughout my career, I was very focused on developing my leadership abilities, which is important. Coaches always need to be working on developing their leadership abilities. But I really regret that I didn't take enough stock of how do I develop my athletes' leadership abilities? Because ultimately, the most successful teams, in my experience, the least leadership comes from the coaches. When you've got those leaders on the court, when you've got student athletes holding each other accountable, picking each other up, encouraging one another, providing constructive criticism for one another, that's when the success really happens. When it's not always the coach's voice projecting a correction or an improvement or a praise. When it's from your peers, it's so much more impactful when it's done in a really positive way, using really strong leadership. The next two leadership styles I'm going to talk about are very opposing leadership styles. Democratic leadership versus autocratic leadership. Democratic leaders, they solicit and listen to, consider all team members' opinions before making team decisions. What this does is it very quickly engenders a culture of mutual trust and respect between athletes and coaches. And there's a lot of buy-in. It's human nature. When you're involved in decision-making, when your voice is heard, you're that much more invested in making sure that decision is successful. Like any leadership style, there are drawbacks. So you have to be willing to take a slower, more deliberative approach to decision-making and understand that as the coach, your opinion is one of many, and you need to be willing to really listen to the opinions of others. On the other side of the spectrum is autocratic leadership. That's where you're limiting input from stakeholders, and coaches are making most, if not all, team-related decisions with little or no feedback. What this does is it creates a very highly structured, top-down culture where the opportunities for input are minimized and the decision-making process is more streamlined through the unquestioned leader who's the coach. This can sound very scary for coaches. In my research, a lot more coaches on anonymous surveys ended up being autocratic leaders that when their name was on it actually said, I'm an autocratic leader. And a lot of that has to go with what does autocratic mean outside the context of sports and this idea of being somebody who doesn't necessarily want feedback or input. But within the context of sports, it's very reasonable for coaches to be autocratic leaders. You're the coach. You're responsible for making team decisions. You're responsible for their outcomes. So it makes sense if you're coaching a young team, a new team, a team that doesn't have many athletes with very developed leadership abilities, that you'd want to make the decisions based on your expertise, your knowledge, your understanding, and ultimately you have to live with them. You're responsible for them. So it makes a lot of sense why coaches sometimes tend to be more autocratic. You have a vision, you have a series of outcomes, you know how to get there, you're going to make all the decisions. There's no right or wrong, democratic or autocratic, but having an understanding of what leadership style you gravitate towards more in terms of decision-making is really important. Because again, whether you're autocratic or democratic, it's very important that your athletes understand how decisions are being made. Because if that's not very clear to them, it can be difficult for them to accept those decisions in the end once you've made them. And then the last leadership style I'm going to talk about is transactional leadership. Transactional leadership is leadership style that's not quite as common now as it used to be for previous generations of coaches. but it's still, I think, an effective leadership style used in specific ways at specific times to achieve specific outcomes. So what does that mean? I think most coaches, if not all coaches, display a little bit of transactional leadership because it's about setting clear standards and expectations up front. So if you have a team meeting where you set your rules, your team rules, your standards, your expectations at the beginning of the year, you make it clear to everybody, that's transactional leadership. If you're late for practice 3 times, you can't start the next game. That is a rule that's transactional in nature that you've set up front, right? Transactional leadership also focuses on this idea of a contingent rewards and punishment system, focusing on upholding rules and policies. Again, as the leader, you're setting up that if you do the right things, if you meet expectations, that you can be rewarded. But if you don't, there are going to be these consequences that are instilled to get you to understand the importance of why that rule or expectation or standard was implemented in the first place. As a transactional leader, it's really important to remember that it's a leadership style that's more inflexible and opposed to change, and it's focused on short-term goals. So again, as a leader, if your best player is late for the 3rd time before the big game, you can't start her in the next game. Otherwise, you're going to risk undermining your credibility as a leader and losing your team. So those standards and expectations and team rules that you set out at the beginning, you've got to be willing as a leader to carry through with those throughout the entire season. Otherwise, you're not going to achieve your intended purpose with having them in the first place, and you're going to risk undermining your credibility as a leader. So in the last part of the presentation, I'm going to talk about a question that I ask myself a lot and I get asked a lot. How do I know if my leadership style is working? So let's go back to the questions and answers from the beginning. How do I know if I've accomplished my goal of everybody having fun or a great experience? Well, now I need to be really honest with myself and look at outcomes. I need to look at, overall, what were my eyes telling me during the year? What was the feedback I was getting during the year? Don't always just look at the end, right? It's very easy to get to the end and say, okay, now I'm going to ask everybody how things went. But you're collecting data every day in every interaction, every practice, every activity, every time you talk to one of your athletes, or you have an interaction with them, or you witness what they're doing on or off the court. Those are opportunities for you to gain an understanding of the impact you're having on them in a positive or a negative way. So ultimately, when you look at, did I get the outcomes I wanted? That there are going to be some qualitative measures, some quantitative measures. There's going to be different ways, but I always say, again, it's not about, at the end of the season, did 15 of my kids all have a great experience? And if 14 had a good experience, I was almost a great leader. And if 10 had a good experience and I was above average leader, that's not how you should judge yourself in terms of whether or not your leadership style was effective. Ultimately, there's no such thing as a perfect leader who always practices the best leadership style. Don't think that. Don't give up. Don't think you're failing if 5 of your 15 kids, when you reflect on the season, had a great experience. You are not failing. Leadership is a journey, and it's filled with successes and failures, relatively speaking, ups and downs. But the defining part of the leadership journey is not how many times you succeeded or failed, but simply that you cared enough about your athletes and team to keep trying to be a better leader. To me, that's the most important thing, that you're always trying to do better for your kids and your team. That, to me, is a hallmark of a successful leader. And then I'll just end with a few things for how do you continue to improve your leadership practice and abilities over time. First off, be willing to go through that critical assessment of the intentional leadership choices that you made that directly impacted your athletes or team's ability to accomplish goals. Did I feel like at the end of the year, my athletes really got to know me better and I got to know them better, and that we built a stronger relationship based on trust and respect, in part because of my approach to communication and relationship building? Talking to them off the court, getting to know them off the court. Did that intentional leadership behavior of always starting our communications off with something that had nothing to do with basketball, do I believe that was having an intended effect? Can I change something about it? Should I stick with it? Those are important internal assessments that coaches need to have on an ongoing basis, but also at the end of a season, to determine whether or not that intentional leadership choice, had the positive or intended effect that we were hoping for when we decided to make it. Be honest with yourself during challenging times and take ownership of your leadership decisions. It's in sports, you could hear a lot that, more is learned from losing than winning. And I think there's a good amount of truth to that. But I also think that there's a lot of truth to, leaders learn a lot about themselves during challenging times, as opposed to times where everything's going great, because that's when those decisions are so much tougher. That's when they're so much more agonizing, and that's when you're so much harder on yourself. So really try to take a step back and look through a clear lens at those decisions you made during challenging times, and be honest with yourself. Don't just say, because times are challenging, I've got to look at things through a negative lens. Really try to have a clear perspective when assessing those leadership decisions. Continuously gain leadership knowledge and tools that can apply to your leadership practice. Again, a presentation like this, thank you so much to everybody for, tuning in, and I hope you're able to learn something, get some really great takeaways, some leadership knowledge, some tools, but always seek out other resources, even if they're not specifically related to leadership for coaches, but they're for organizational leaders, or they're for teachers, or people working with similar populations as you. All of those different resources are good, and they're all going to help you be a better, more well-rounded and successful leader. Constantly work to understand the evolving needs of your athletes so that your leadership style best meets and addresses what they need. Again, part of leadership is about being true to who you are as a leader, but also understanding what the needs of your athletes are. I always tell coaches, don't change your leadership style based on your athletes' needs, but adapt and adjust it so that within your leadership style, you are best meeting their needs. Again, it's about having multiple tools in their toolbox. My communication's not working to inspire and motivate. Let me try my behavior modeling. Let me try to inspire confidence. Let me try to be enthusiastic. There's all these different ways and tools that you can use to be an effective leader, but you have to understand what the needs of your athletes are so that you can match those two things up. Be open to new ideas about leadership practice and approaches you hadn't previously tried or learned. Hopefully you learned something, a tool or a bit of knowledge that you could apply to your leadership practice that you hadn't previously tried before. And then lastly, seek out and listen to feedback on your leadership practice from people that you trust. I always tell people, have somebody, whether they're a coach or a friend or a mentor or a loved one, whomever it is, that knows you, knows your values and beliefs, and can give you honest feedback. Because sometimes as coaches and just leaders in general, we have blinders on, or we have blind spots, and we're not able to really get that clear picture, that clear assessment of all of our different choices. So it's always sometimes helpful to hear it from somebody else on the outside looking in, to be able to say, I know you're being really hard on yourself about this, but I do believe it was coming from a good place. Or I know you think this was successful, but I was noticing the body language. All those things are really important for a leader being able to assess their leadership decisions and then improve their abilities over time. So that is my presentation. Feel free to reach out, email me, find me on social media, send me your leadership questions, your leadership scenarios. I'm always happy to talk through those things. I'm always happy to provide any help, advice, guidance that I can. My book is Lead Like a Pro, Effective Leadership Styles for Athletic Coaches. I hope you'll consider buying it or checking it out from the library, which would be amazing. And thank you so much to the library for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks so much to everybody for tuning in.
Okay. Yes, and we do have Dr. Raidbard's book, Lead Like a Pro, available at the Pottstown Library. It's in our nonfiction section upstairs on the balcony. You can always ask the librarian to help you find it. Thank you so much for joining us.